Alright, everybody, for today's critical thought, we're going to discuss adding personality to first person games. This has always been one of the weaknesses, I think, for a lot of developers. Because the first person shooter, or just first person genre in general, has really focused on the ever popular silent protagonists. Your Gordon Freeman, your Doom guy, and stuff like that. But when it works, or when we see developers try to push things further, it can create a lot more interesting characters, even if you don't intend for that person to speak or make one-liners. Now, when it comes to having personality in video games, or personality in general in first person, there's a few key areas that we see developers focus on, and it works from a psychological point of view. The first one, obviously, is from the vocal side. Your quips again, your character talking to people, and actually having this person try and have a say in what's going on. Some of the big examples obviously would be characters like Lo Wang in Shadow Warrior, Duke Nukem, and I'm sure there are a few more that come to mind. But of course, the idea is that our character is talking at specific parts during play or after something big has happened. And while this certainly works at kind of like the surface layer, it's not something that can really instill a personality because of the fact that it's still locked to specific events. You see this in a lot of video games where characters will say something, but it only occurs during a specific cutscene or a specific incident. And then 95% of the time, they are just quiet. And one of the things I would like to see developers try and experiment is to have the character actually comment on what's going on in more of a emergent style. As in, let's say you're playing a first-person shooter and you do something very good or very badass, maybe your character can make a comment or say something along those lines, and then that'll be different if, let's say, you took a lot of damage during that fight. Now, the reason why we don't see a lot of developers go this route should be obvious. Having a character who is constantly talking, constantly making noise, can start to grate on your nerves after a while, especially if we're talking about an 8 to 10 hour long experience and the person is commenting every 5 to 10 seconds. Now, one of the more interesting aspects that we really don't see too much of is body language. And body language and first-person gameplay typically is a lot harder to do right. It's the idea of the character, and again, you're seeing me in third person, but I'm obviously looking in first person, being able to see the person's body as they're talking or they're reacting to things. It's the idea of giving a sense of personality without needing to say a word, or one of everybody's favorite expressions, show, don't tell. And two really good examples of this. One would be the Doom Marine or Doom guy from Doom 2016. Again, while that character is a silent protagonist, he's probably one of the most emotive characters we've seen in modern video games. From how he, cracks his knuckles when he's about to start fighting, to cocking the shotgun when he first picks it up, or simply in how he kills and dispatches the enemies with the glory kill system. Again, you can read a lot about someone when it comes to their body language and the gestures they use. It's one of the reasons why I talk with my hands, sometimes on purpose and sometimes just to keep things busy there. But another good example of that kind of first-person gestures or first-person body language would be from the movie Hardcore Henry that we talked about a while ago. Now, obviously, Hardcore Henry is not a video game, but it was designed to mimic a video game, down to, nameless thugs you have to kill, a boss battle, and of course, set-piece battles. But the character of Henry, again, for not saying one word, is still very emotive in how he presents himself and the gestures he uses while he's interacting with people, fighting, and stuff like that. It's a difference that you see a lot in first-person shooters where the main character is very robotic. So when they stand, with their chests out, they're just looking straight ahead and they don't move at all. And then they walk like they're on a runway, not keeping their body, not any kind of motion or stuff like that. one of the more interesting aspects, or one of the more interesting examples of having that emotion in terms of a first-person experience, was from the game Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, where every time there was a cutscene, the game would switch to a first-person and show whatever Spider-Man, I guess that may not be grammatically correct, but whatever spider you were playing as, talking, and then of course you would see them gesturing and stuff like that. And this is one of those aspects that can be very hard to nail down if you're trying to make it emergent or have it happen realistically within the game. Because one of the issues that we see with a first-person camera perspective is that it can cause nausea and seasickness for a lot of people. And if your character is, constantly, moving their head back and forth, or, things are shaking, or even doing stuff with altering the perspective or color on screen, like let's say a character is drugged and everything is in a fine haze, that can cause people a lot of eye strain. For instance, when I played Amnesia: The Dark Descent, one of the things that they do is when the character is starting to experience sanity defects or sanity problems, the game starts to create this kind of haze effect. It's the idea that when you start moving, everything becomes a blur. And while that is a great narrative piece, it's also one thing that can kill your eyes. And when I was playing that game, I could start to feel that pressure in my head a few times from playing it. And you have to be really careful when it comes to that. Another idea could be having a set of gestures that the player or the character could use, at specific moments or during specific tells during the game. Like, it could be even something as simple as a guy cracking his knuckles before fighting. Or maybe, going like this with his hand after a tough fight. Or even in something like giving an enemy the finger when they're feeling particularly badass. But, again, the idea is to create a sense of personality for these characters. Now, before we wrap things up for this video, one of the more interesting aspects, or one of the more challenging pulls or push and pulls before this, is when you're trying to have a character but still have it relate to the player. And what we've seen lately are games that allow the player to essentially inhabit a character, but it's still being viewed through the lens of the player. Prey 2016, I think, or 2017, I always forget the dates at this point, is a good example of this. In Prey, you are playing a named character of Morgan Yu, but what that character is experiencing and the choices that you make are entirely within the player's control. I'm sorry, I just looked up, it was 2017. But Morgan Yu as a character is not representing anything that's happening within the confines of that game. Now, there is, of course, narrative that you're talking to recordings of yourself, but how Morgan Yu's personality or what he or she wants or needs in this game space doesn't matter at all. And that's one of the more interesting pulls of these kinds of games. Even with emotive characters like Kate Archer from No One Lives Forever, Duke Nukem, Lo Wang, and so on, these characters are still confined by the player themselves. They are never going to do anything that the player doesn't want them to do. And for obvious reasons. Imagine playing a game where you're trying to do something and the character decides to, tip over, or, starts vomiting, or anything like that. Whenever you take control away from the player, it can create a very polarized experience. But at the same time, though, how do you balance that with trying to make a character who seems to actually have a personality that's not locked to cutscenes? As the antithesis example of this, or an antithetical example, I think I may have just created a word there, Ethan in Resident Evil 7 is a character who you're supposed to feel some kind of connection for. He's searching for his wife. Crazy things are happening. But the problem is that 95% of the time, Ethan doesn't comment on anything. And the only things we really know by the end of Resident Evil 7 is that Ethan doesn't like it when you chop off his hand or foot. That's pretty much the extent of it. And it would be interesting to see developers try to add more personality to these characters, and try to do it in a way that seems emergent and genuine. because when it only happens during cutscenes or during, let's say, every time the player gets hit, it just comes off as being faked. Now, to wrap things up, I want to ask a question for you folks. Can you think of games other than ones that I mentioned here that have emotive characters in the first person? Again, first and third person presents different designs and different considerations, so I want to try and keep things specifically towards first person for this video. And can you think of characters or games where the designer tried to make this character have a personality, but it just comes off as being faked or, again, very robotic? And we've talked again before about trying to make conversations seem more realistic and lifelike, but that will be a topic for another video. So with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until our next video, have a good night. Before we get to the credits, just a quick shout out and thank you to the supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/GWBycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.